The clock was approaching 10:47, and the office teemed with engineers struggling with impossible calculations, each failed attempt thickening the air with tension. Jack Miller, the silent construction worker everyone ignored, approached, offering his opinion quietly. The engineers barely glanced at him, their laughter and sneers rippling through the room, treating his effort as a meaningless intrusion. Yet Jack's gaze remained steady, his hands moving almost instinctively, every lesson from his father and every moment of work guiding him. Despite the ridicule and impossible odds, he pressed on, determined to tackle what no one else could. The air at the construction site was thick, not with dust, but with tension. A group of engineers and architects circled a whiteboard, their brows furrowed and their voices harsh with frustration. Numbers scattered across the board like a battlefield, but no solution emerged. And then, Jack Miller, the quiet bricklayer everyone ignored, spoke calmly and surely, "I can solve this." The room froze. At first, there was silence, the kind that stretches just long enough to hurt. Then came laughter, harsh, cruel, full of contempt. An engineer scoffed, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. "What do you know about equations, Miller? Go back to your bricks, leave the reasoning to us." The words hung in the air, a perfect blend of humiliation and disbelief. Jack stood there, taking it all in without a word, his jaw set, his gaze unwavering. That moment wasn't just about math. It was about the silent weight of being underestimated, about bearing the scars of every time he'd been silenced by those who believed knowledge belonged only to men with degrees. The engineers smiled, scribbling numbers as if to erase Jack's words. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he let the insult fuel something deeper, a silent flame no one else could see. The problem at hand was no trivial matter, it supported the weight of a skyscraper. Millions of dollars and countless lives depended on the accuracy of this calculation. The deadline loomed like a storm cloud, the calculation needed to be solved within the hour, or the project would face a $10 million loss. Every second that passed weighed on the engineers' arrogance, and their certainty cracked under the pressure. Even so, they scoffed at the idea that a bricklayer could offer a solution. For Jack, those scornful looks were nothing new. He had lived in the shadows of humiliation, carrying bricks while others carried clipboards, nodding silently as his thoughts were dismissed. Yet something shone in his expression that day, not anger, but determination. It was the look of a man who knew that the line between failure and triumph can sometimes be drawn by the most unlikely hand. And so the tension mounted, like a thread stretched too thin, threatening to snap at any moment. What if he was right? What if the man they dismissed as just a worker held the answer to what the so-called experts couldn't solve? The question hung in the air, silent but inevitable, as history approached a critical juncture. Jack Miller moved silently around the construction site, his hands rough from years of work, but his mind sharp as any engineer's. He had always been seen as just a worker, a pair of strong arms rather than a thinker. Around him, engineers carried clipboards, discussing formulas with arrogance oozing from every gesture. The foreman watched silently, like a beacon in a storm, measuring but not interfering. Jack felt the familiar pang of contempt, knowing most wouldn't give him the chance to prove himself. But he would try anyway. The whiteboard was a chaos of numbers and scribbles, the calculations tangled like vines in a forgotten garden. The engineers' frustration was palpable, each failed attempt increased their contempt. Jack, holding a piece of chalk, surveyed the room with unwavering calm. He wasn't there for applause, only to discover the truth hidden within the formulas. Every glance from his colleagues carried a reminder of how little the world expected of him. Papers cluttered the makeshift office, drafts of structural calculations overlapping like missing puzzle pieces. The risk was clear: if the load distribution remained unresolved, the building could fail inspections and completely halt the project. A $10 million disaster loomed over everyone's minds, but only Jack seemed unfazed by the fear that paralyzed the others. He silently crunched the numbers, connecting dots the others ignored. The air held a tension thick enough to choke. Among the engineers, pride and ignorance danced in equal measure. Some whispered doubts about Jack's skill, snickering at what they called the bricklayer's delusion. Others rolled their eyes, tapping their pens impatiently, convinced that recognition belonged only to those who wore tailored suits. Jack, however, had spent his entire life learning to navigate the quiet corners of knowledge, where insight went unnoticed. He knew that brilliance sometimes hid behind the most ordinary facades. The foreman's gaze shifted from Jack to the engineers, a silent judge of patience and skill. He'd seen countless disputes over calculations, but never like this, a humble worker defying experts as the clock ticked relentlessly. The construction site seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see who would falter first. Jack's quiet confidence contrasted sharply with the engineer's arrogance, his mind weaving patterns they couldn't yet perceive. Recognition hadn't yet been granted, but it remained just beyond the horizon. Jack set down his chalk briefly, remembering nights spent studying under a dim light, learning from donated books, struggling through hardship. The echoes of those lessons resonated in his hands and eyes as he approached the whiteboard. Every brick he had laid, every calculation secretly memorized, had prepared him for this moment. The engineers, overcome by ego, failed to notice the storm silently brewing beside them. And so, as Jack's hand hovered over the first equation, the room teetered on the brink of revelation. Jack approached the whiteboard, chalk in hand, feeling the weight of all the eyes on him. Each number he wrote contained more than just digits, it contained years of lessons learned in silence. The engineers approached, some smiling, others frowning, daring him to falter. It was a test not only of skill, but of courage in the face of the scorn that ground him like dust. He took a deep breath, imagining each number as a brick in a wall that could stand or crumble. As he began rearranging the equations, Jack thought of laying bricks at home, where precision meant safety and mistakes were unforgiving. Every number must fit perfectly, or the entire structure collapses, he muttered under his breath. The engineers exchanged doubtful glances, some chuckling nervously, their arrogance trembling like loose scaffolding. Every scribble Jack made was deliberate, measured, a silent rebellion against the doubt surrounding him. His confidence was subtle, but each stroke spoke louder than his words ever could. An engineer whispered softly, "This is ridiculous. A bricklayer thinks he can fool us?" Their laughter, though quieter, carried a twinge of embarrassment. Jack didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that those who mock often reveal their own insecurities. He concentrated, analyzing the problem as if it were a wall of unevenly stacked bricks, each misaligned number a potential disaster. His hands moved with a rhythm born of experience, invisible but undeniable. The room seemed to shrink around him as Jack worked, tension pressing against his chest like a steel beam. Time seemed infinite and fleeting, every second a test of patience, every glance from the engineers a reminder of what was at stake. The foreman watched silently, feeling the weight of history and the possibility of recognition hidden in this simple man. Jack's mind saw patterns where others saw chaos, lines and numbers fitting together like puzzle pieces. Each small victory in his calculations was a whisper of triumph waiting to be shouted. Even as some engineers began muttering corrections, Jack's focus remained unwavering. He saw no mockery, he only saw the solution taking shape beneath his hands. The chalk scratched softly across the board, a soundtrack of determination amidst disbelief. He compared the equations to the walls he had built, each piece in its perfect place, or the whole would crumble. In that moment, mathematics and masonry were one, and Jack was the silent conductor of a symphony no one else could hear. As he paused to step back, a faint pattern appeared on the board, lines connecting numbers like invisible mortar. The engineers approached, their skepticism warring with curiosity. The room held its breath, the tension so thick it seemed almost tangible. Jack knew this was only the first hurdle, the beginning of the proof that knowledge and skill could emerge from unexpected places. And as he looked around at the faces staring back at him, he realized the storm was just beginning, with far greater challenges yet to come. Jack's eyes scanned the numbers, tracing lines and connections others hadn't noticed. There was something wrong with the engineer's formula, a subtle flaw hidden like a crack in the foundation. He silently compared it to measuring a wall incorrectly, the error invisible at first, but catastrophic in the end. The engineers still argued among themselves, oblivious to the danger lurking behind their logic. Jack felt a spark of anticipation. He was seeing a pattern no one else could. The error was clever in its concealment, like a hidden termite eating away at a sturdy beam. Jack began making notes on the board, connecting numbers and variables with a precision born of both intuition and experience. Each revelation made him feel a silent thrill, the kind that only arises when intuition meets opportunity. The engineers looked at him curiously, but pride prevented them from admitting they couldn't see what he saw. Arrogance had blinded them, opening a door for Jack to walk through. He traced the formula like a bricklayer inspecting a crooked wall, noting where the support failed and where the balance was miscalculated. An equation built on error is like a crooked foundation. No matter how many bricks you pile, it will crumble, he muttered to himself. The foreman watched silently, sensing the shift in energy and the scorn that still lingered among the skeptics. Jack felt the weight of each miscalculation, imagining the disaster it could cause if left unchecked. The room became a silent theater, with every observer holding their breath. Some engineers began to notice anomalies, their confidence shaken but their egos still in check. Jack didn't speak, allowing the patterns to gradually reveal themselves, like a mural emerging from rough sketches. He rearranged numbers, highlighted inconsistencies, and drew invisible connections that would soon become undeniable. The tension in the room rose as whispers of uncertainty replaced the earlier laughter. The power of knowledge silently recognized itself in the hands of this simple man. Jack's mind raced, connecting past experiences with present insights. Every night spent studying alone, every problem solved by candlelight, prepared him for this very moment. The numbers on the board were no longer mere symbols, they became the bricks and mortar of a solution, each one supporting the next. He knew the engineer's mistakes would be exposed, but he also knew it wasn't about proving them wrong, it was about saving the project. His calm and determination cut through the room like a silent wind. By the end of the hour, a hidden order had revealed itself in the chaos, a pattern so precise it almost seemed poetic. The engineer's initial disbelief began to waver as Jack's corrections aligned perfectly with the structural logic. Still, he remained silent, letting the truth reveal itself speak louder than any argument. The storm was far from over, and greater challenges awaited him, but for the first time, Jack felt a whisper of recognition stir in the room. And with that, the path to the next challenge silently opened. Jack's hand trembled slightly as memories of his father flooded him. His father had been more than a father, he had been Jack's mentor, his inspiration, the man who first showed him that knowledge could build worlds. Together, they spent long nights with books spread out on the kitchen table, equations flowing like rivers, laughter mingling with lessons. These moments were the foundation of Jack's dreams, the belief that he could achieve something greater, no matter the circumstances. But that foundation was shattered in an instant. His father's sudden death left a void deeper than any hole in a wall or crack in a beam. The pain was raw, unbearable, a weight that oppressed him as he had to leave school and enter adulthood prematurely. He became the provider, the protector of his ailing mother and younger sister, sacrificing his own education and dreams to keep them alive. The pain of losing the man who had believed in him most never faded, it persisted, silent but relentless, through every challenge he faced. Yet, in that pain, Jack found a spark. He continued to study at night, under the dim light of a worn lamp, scribbling calculations on scraps of cardboard, letting the numbers become his silent companions. Each solved equation was a small victory, a way to honor his father's memory and the dreams they shared. Math became more than numbers, it became a bridge to the life his father had envisioned for him, a testament to the fact that knowledge can triumph over hardship. As he prepared to face the problem ahead, Jack drew strength from that memory. Each calculation was a tribute, each precise alignment of numbers a way to rebuild the confidence his father had instilled. The engineers may have ignored him, but within him, his father's lessons, love, and guidance created a clarity that no amount of mockery or doubt could shake. The stage was set, and he was ready to let that silent legacy guide his hands. The clock on the wall seemed louder than ever, each tick driving the weight of expectation into Jack's chest. The engineers whispered doubts and criticisms, some barely concealing their contempt, while the problem before him represented a $10 million risk. Jack felt the pressure wrap around him like steel, but he refused to let it faze him. Every glance at the formulas, every movement of the pen, reminded him of his father's calm, wise guidance, a voice that had always believed in him. Amid the tense murmurs and the impatient tapping of fingers, Jack realized this was more than a test of skill, it was a test of resolve. Every doubt cast upon him, every sneer disguised as advice, only sharpened his resolve. He could almost hear his father whispering from the shadows, "You can do it, Jack. You always could." And with that, he leaned closer, letting concentration drown out his fear and courage take over. Jack Miller picked up the chalk, his hands trembling for a split second, but his eyes burned with determination. The room fell into an oppressive, chest-tightening silence. All eyes were fixed on him, skeptical and mocking. One engineer muttered harshly, "Jack, maybe you should leave this to us, we have actual training. This isn't for carrying bricks, you know?" Another scoffed, "Stop pretending you can figure this out. Stick to what you know, lifting and moving things. Leave the numbers to us." Jack gritted his teeth. He'd heard it all his life, doubt disguised as laughter, mockery disguised as advice. He blocked it all out, focusing on the board as if it were a brick wall needing alignment. Step by step, he began to write, each equation a precise placement, each line a silent challenge. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if they evoked every night of study, every memory of his father's lessons, every moment he'd pushed himself beyond what the world expected. The tension in the room grew with each issue he wrote. The murmurs of corrections and the snickers of the engineers tormented him, but Jack was unfazed. "You're wasting your time," one of them said quietly, almost spitefully. "No one will take this seriously. Accept it, this isn't your world." But deep down, Jack remembered his father's voice, "You can do it, Jack. You always could." The words anchored him, steadying his hand as he approached the final lines. Finally, he stepped back, the chalk suspended in midair. The numbers were right. Perfect. A charged silence filled the room, like the pause before a storm begins. For the first time, the arrogance around them faltered, the engineers could only stare. Jack Miller had done what they insisted was impossible, proving that determination, ingenuity, and quiet courage could overcome ridicule and doubt. The room remained frozen, the weight of disbelief pressing down on every engineer. Jack Miller's solution shone on the board like a verdict no one wanted to admit. Whispers began to circulate around the team, some in admiration, others still clinging to denial. One engineer, the one who had doubted him the most, stepped forward, his voice barely above a growl, I don't understand. How did you do that?" Jack's gaze met theirs, calm but unyielding. "I focused on the problem, not on what others thought," he said softly, letting the simplicity of the truth hit him like a hammer. The tension that had gripped the room for hours began to dissipate, replaced by a slow, reluctant respect. The same engineers who had mocked him, who whispered that he would never rise above the mere task of carrying bricks and following orders, now found themselves unable to look away. Finally, the chief engineer exhaled, a mixture of awe and reluctant admiration in his voice. "Jack, that's incredible. You didn't just solve the problem, you saved us from disaster." The room erupted, not with laughter, but with the kind of admiration that recognizes greatness. Jack Miller, the quiet, overlooked carpenter, had proven that courage, skill, and determination could shatter any expectation, leaving no doubt that genius can manifest itself in the most unexpected forms. The room slowly quieted, the echoes of the last hour lingering like a storm finally passed. Jack Miller remained silent, letting the weight of what he had accomplished settle over him. He had faced ridicule, doubt, and disbelief, and emerged victorious. One of the younger engineers approached hesitantly, his eyes wide. I never thought, like you." Jack gave a slight smile, shaking his head. "I didn't do anything magical," he said softly. "I just focused on the problem, not the doubt." Once everyone confirmed that Jack Miller's calculation was perfect, a deep silence fell over the room. Suddenly, the sound of loud, deliberate clapping echoed. Everyone turned. The project owner, Charles Montgomery, a respected and influential man, had been watching from the outset. He walked slowly toward Jack, looking him in the eye, and said, while some laughed, "He worked While others belittled, he proved that knowledge doesn't wear a uniform. The room fell silent, absorbing every word. Turning to the engineers and architects, Charles continued, "Diplomacy without humility is like buildings without foundations. They may look impressive, but they crumble at the first storm. Respect each worker, for brilliance can appear where least expected." A wave of shame, admiration, and reflection swept through the room. Finally, he placed his hand on Jack's shoulder and announced, "Starting today, I will fund your engineering studies. You have the mind of a true engineer, and the world needs that mind to be recognized. I will ensure that you and your family never lack for anything." Jack's eyes filled with tears, containing emotions too deep for words. In that moment, not only had a calculation been solved, but an entire life had been transformed. Jack took a step back, taking a deep breath, the weight of the day slowly lifting from his shoulders. The room, once filled with doubt and skepticism, now glowed with respect and admiration. Every glance in his direction revealed recognition of his perseverance, his focus, and his quiet genius. As the team began to disperse, Jack's mind briefly wandered to the long nights of hard work, the sacrifices, and the lessons learned from his father, lessons of patience, resilience, and self-reliance. He realized that every struggle had been a stepping stone to this moment, and that nothing could diminish the strength he had found within himself. Standing, Jack looked around the room and smiled, a brief, determined smile that carried the weight of victory. His story was far from over, but this chapter had proven an undeniable truth: courage, intelligence, and tireless dedication could overcome even the most difficult doubts. And for those watching, remember, no matter the obstacles, no matter the voices of doubt, greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places. Keep believing, keep striving, and never underestimate your own potential. The journey is just beginning. This story reminds us that we should never underestimate anyone. Share this message with someone you believe has a hidden talent. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. This helps us bring you more exciting stories. May God bless your family.